Good Friday, everybody. If you follow my Facebook page, facebook.com/Southern Conservative, you may have seen a post in which I talked about a bonus podcast this week. Well, here it is. Thank you for joining me today for this special Friday podcast, the 9th Southern Conservative podcast. My name is Ty. Folks, I wanted to do an extra podcast today because there was so much late-breaking news yesterday that there was absolutely no way that I could cram it all into yesterday's 30-minute podcast on top of everything else that I talked about yesterday. By the way, before you listen to this podcast, it's imperative that you listen to the previous two podcasts so that you have all the background information necessary to understand what's going on today. Also, I'm going to flash text messages on the screen during the podcast. These are texts that were sent back and forth between Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, and I'm going to show them on the screen for you. Texts that are in pink are the ones that were written by Lisa Page. Those that are in blue were written by Peter Strzok. Now, Senator Chuck Grassley, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, released 7 pages of text messages between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. And I'll provide a link down in the description of this video where you can access the text messages that Grassley has released. In a letter Chuck Grassley sent to FBI Director Christopher Wray, he highlights text messages sent and received on February 25, 2016, in which Peter Strzok and Lisa Page discussed the personnel from the FBI and DOJ that would be involved in the Hillary Clinton email investigation. In one text message, Lisa Page is concerned about being too hard on Hillary because she could be the next president of the United States and retaliate against FBI and DOJ members. Lisa Page writes, "One more thing, she might be our next president. The last thing you need us going in there loaded for bear. You think she's going to remember or care that it was more DOJ than FBI?" And Strzok writes, "Agreed. I called Bill and relayed what we discussed. He agrees. I will email you and a redacted name the same." Now, Bill in this case is not Bill Clinton, but rather the head of the FBI counterintelligence. Now, worried that Hillary might come back on them for investigating her email server and her mishandling of classified information, Strzok and Page discussed the possibility of having a special counsel conduct the investigation and referenced Patrick Fitzgerald. Now, you might remember Patrick Fitzgerald. He was the special counsel in the Valerie Plame case during the George W. Bush administration. He was tasked with finding out who leaked the CIA agent Valerie Plame's name to the press. And while it was known all along that Richard Armitage is the one who leaked the name, Scooter Libby wound up taking the fall for a process crime. It was a politically charged investigation meant to go after Dick Cheney and Karl Rove, in a similar way that Robert Mueller's investigation is politically charged to go after Donald Trump. Anyway, Strzok pitched the idea to Lisa Page on March 18, 2016, writing, "Thought of the perfect person D can bounce this off of." And she says, "Who?" He replies back, "Pat," meaning Patrick Fitzgerald. "You gotta give me credit if we go with him, and delay briefing him on until I can get back and do it, late next week or later." And Page writes, "We talked about him last night, not for this, but how great he is. He's in private practice though, right? Suppose you could still bring him back, and yes, I'll hold." And Strzok writes, "Yes, he's at Skadden in Chicago. I haven't talked to him for a year or two. Don't forget that Dag Comey appointed him as special counsel in the Plame matter, and that he was there for Comey's investiture." He also wrote, "I could work with him again. We'd get some done." Page writes, "I know. Like I said, we discussed Boss and him yesterday." And Strzok writes, "And it frustrates me because Bill at his 7:15 brings up the whole matter in front of his dads, one who is acting for Dina, who immediately goes to John and tells him how Bill is stressed because all of this stuff going on about a special prosecutor. Bill needs to learn to not talk to everybody about this when he's upset about it. And I guarantee that agent, while discreet, is certainly going to tell at least a few other people." He also writes, "I'm sending redacted to the 8:30 with Jones so that I can meet with John," whoever John and Jones are. And Page writes, "Did he go so far as to talk about why we started talking special prosecutor?" And Strzok writes, "I don't think so." And then on May 13th, 2016, Lisa Page texted this to Peter Strzok. Hey, forgot to ask you if you mentioned the whole special counsel thing to Andy. As we've discussed before, Andy is most likely Andrew McCabe, the deputy director of the FBI. Now, Peter Strzok was the lead investigator into the Hillary Clinton email scandal. For fear of retaliation by Hillary should she be elected president, he recommended a special counsel. But then, around the same time that he was texting Lisa Page, he's helping to rewrite James Comey's exoneration letter of Hillary Clinton. Strzok knew that there were crimes committed, and yet he's complicit in helping to get Hillary off the hook. So shouldn't there be a special counsel today to conduct a real investigation into the Clinton email scandal? Sadly, that's probably never going to happen, but it definitely should. Now, James Comey came out on July 5th, 2016, and gave a public statement saying that no reasonable prosecutor would go after Hillary because there was no criminal intent. Just before the 2016 election, on October 28th, James Comey reopened that investigation due to the discovery of new emails believed to be pertinent to the case. But just days before the election, James Comey reached the same conclusion as he did back in July, that nothing criminal was found. To give some more background about Andrew McCabe, his wife Jill was running for a state Senate seat in Virginia in 2005. Her campaign received almost $700,000 from two entities tied to former Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe. Now that's an insane amount of money for a single state Senate race. Jill wound up losing that election, by the way. But it's important to know that Terry McAuliffe is a very close confidant to Hillary Clinton. Now, Chuck Grassley had sent a message to James Comey the day he reopened the investigation, asking if Andrew McCabe had a conflict of interest in the Hillary Clinton email case, since McCabe's wife had received money from Governor McAuliffe, who was very close to Hillary Clinton. Grassley had learned of the ties between McCabe and McAuliffe after an article was then recently published by the Wall Street Journal. The FBI responded by saying that there was no conflict of interest, actual or apparent, that required recusal or waiver. But text messages on October 28th, that's the same day James Comey reopened the investigation, from Strzok and Page tell a different story. The chief of staff to James Comey, James Rybicki, thought that McCabe should recuse himself from the investigation. Lisa Page wrote to Peter Strzok, Rybicki just called to check in. He very clearly 100% believes that Andy should be recused because of the perception. And Strzok writes, God. Page writes, our statement affected the stock market. Don't understand your email. If it's a matter similar to those we've been talking about lately, why no recusal before? Something different? And Peter Strzok replies, I assume McAuliffe picked up, but that doesn't make sense. He said he was interviewing, maybe headed into private practice. So Rybicki felt McCabe needed to recuse himself due to the perception of a conflict, when in reality, there was a huge conflict of interest. McCabe's wife, even though she lost, greatly benefited from the Virginia Democratic Party funds and the political action committee tied to Terry McAuliffe. And of course, McAuliffe and Hillary are very, very good friends, as I've said. So don't you think McCabe would have given special treatment to Hillary, kind of a quid pro quo, if you will? What all of these messages reveal is that the fix was in when it came to the Hillary Clinton email investigation. Previous text messages back up this claim when Lisa Page wrote that it was an act of courage for Loretta Lynch to publicly state that she would accept James Comey's recommendation when she knew Hillary was never going to be charged. So while there was a coordinated effort to get Hillary off the hook so she could remain a viable candidate for the Democratic Party for president, there was also a coordinated effort to go after Donald Trump on Trump-Russia collusion. Strzok, who helped exonerate Hillary, went on to help in the FBI investigation into Donald Trump, and later joined Robert Mueller's team despite believing there was no there. And then, one of the earliest text messages released, there was a discussion of an insurance policy in the event Trump was elected president. The insurance policy probably involves the FBI getting a FISA warrant to spy on Trump's campaign and later on his transition team. So there was coordination and conspiracy on both sides, in both investigations to get Hillary off the hook and to nail Donald Trump. Now, while this story and text messages were released by Chuck Grassley, the New York Times released a story of how Donald Trump considered firing Robert Mueller. And the left is running absolutely wild with this. Trump wanted to fire Mueller because Trump did something wrong that Mueller would find out about. The president had something to hide. And the left and the mainstream media is throwing around obstruction of justice. But supposedly, Trump was considering firing Robert Mueller due to conflicts of interest. That would not be obstruction of justice. It would have been a legitimate reason to get rid of Robert Mueller, who would then have been replaced anyway with a neutral investigator. But Trump never fired Robert Mueller. There's no obstruction for just pitching the idea of firing the man. You actually have to do it to commit obstruction of justice, and even then there's got to be some sort of conspiracy that leads to an obstruction of justice. Trump was thinking of firing Mueller last June, but he didn't do it, and White House counsel Don McGahn had threatened to resign if Trump did it. Trump came out today and said that the story is fake news. Trump had discussed firing Mueller, but he didn't do it, and McGahn didn't threaten to resign. Newt Gingrich, according to Fox News, called this a non-story about a non-event. Look, the left is simply just trying to distract from these reports over how the fix was in for Hillary Clinton, and the reports of coordinated efforts and FISA warrant abuses from top members of the FBI and the DOJ. They don't want to cover those stories. They desperately want to try to find some sort of Trump-Russia collusion. But there is no collusion, folks. After more than a year of the FBI investigation, several congressional committees investigating, the special counsel's investigation, there's no evidence of collusion. Well, Trump spoke again today in Davos, Switzerland. I talked about this yesterday, how he received praise from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for Trump's commitment for moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem after recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital city. Trump also condemned the Palestinian Authority for refusing to meet with Mike Pence during Pence's Middle East trip because of what moves Trump made concerning Israel. And Trump said he's going to cut off aid to the Palestinians if they refuse to sit down and talk peace with Israel. Well, he also touted investment in America today, saying, quote, "America is open for business." Trump said, "The world is witnessing the resurgence of a strong and prosperous America. America is open for business, and we are competitive once again. When the United States grows, so does the world. After years of stagnation, the United States is once again experiencing economic growth. The stock market is smashing one record after another." Yesterday, Trump was at a dinner with European business executives. Siemens President Joe Kaiser congratulated Trump on his tax reform and cited that legislation was the reason why the company will develop gas turbines in the United States. The chairman and CEO of Total, a French energy producer and one of the world's largest oil producers, announced he was going to do more in the United States thanks to the tax cuts. Adidas, Bayer, Nestle, Nokia, Anheuser-Busch, and others have expressed interest in investing in America, thanks to the tax cuts. Looking back home, Americans for Tax Reform is keeping track of a list of companies that have announced bonuses, wage hikes, and 401k match increases due to Trump's tax cuts. The list also includes businesses that have announced plans to create new jobs. You can go to atr.org/list. At the time of this podcast, there are 263 companies listed on their website. Here are some of the more recent major announcements. Home Depot announces a bonus for every hourly employee up to $1,000 depending on the employee's length of service. FedEx is committing more than $3.2 billion in wage increases, bonuses, pension funding due to the recent tax cuts. Over $200 million in increased compensation, about two-thirds of which will go to hourly team members by advancing the 2018 annual pay increases by 6 months to April 1st from the normal October date when pay raises are given. The remainder of the fund increases in performance-based incentive plans for salaried personnel. A voluntary contribution of $1.5 billion to the FedEx pension plan to ensure it remains one of the best funded retirement programs in the country. Investing $1.5 billion to significantly expand FedEx's Express Indianapolis hub over the next 7 years. The Memphis Super Hub will also be modernized and enlarged to a major program, the details of which will be announced later this spring. Starbucks, the very liberal Starbucks, has announced 8,000 new retail jobs and 500 new manufacturing jobs. New employee offerings, raises, and benefits totaling $250 million will be announced later this year. Bottom line, the tax plan is working and it cuts across the political spectrum, despite Nancy Pelosi saying $1,000 bonuses is crumbs, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz saying that it won't amount to much after the money is taxed. But the bottom line is, folks, it's more of your own money that you can keep in your pocket versus the government's pocket. And I'm sure you're happier to be keeping more of your own money than giving it over to the government. I want to remind everybody to be sure to check out the Southern Conservative Facebook page. Go to facebook.com/Southern Conservative. That's facebook.com/Southern Conservative. There you will find links to articles from conservative outlets on news stories you probably won't hear about in the mainstream media. Plus, the newsfeed will have links posted daily to each new podcast. Be sure to also subscribe to this YouTube channel. You'll be alerted every time a new podcast is posted. Remember, podcasts are posted daily, Monday through Thursday. And occasionally, we'll do a special Friday podcast like we're doing today, when the news is just too insane to cram into 4 days. So just to tie up some more loose ends, the House Intelligence Committee memo regarding FISA abuse by top DOJ and FBI officials is slated to be released sometime next week, according to sources, after the State of the Union address on Tuesday. So expect it to be released Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday next week. We'll discuss what's in that memo when it's released to the public. Now, I mentioned yesterday how Trump had pitched a new immigration and DACA plan. I briefly touched on it yesterday, and if we ever get to a final bill that makes its way to Trump's desk, it's almost certainly guaranteed to look differently from this. The devil will be in the details, but here's what Trump's idea is. Chain migration would end, but 4 million chain migrants slated to receive visas due to existing chain migration policies would be grandfathered into this country over the next 2 decades, according to Breitbart News. Amnesty would be granted to at least 1.8 million illegals over a period of 10 to 12 years. The proposal asks for $25 billion to build a border wall. There is no E-Verify mandate for employers in the proposal. The diversity lottery would end. Visas would be limited for family-based immigration and shift to those with certain high-level skills. It's a merit-based system. People like Ted Cruz have blasted the plan, saying that we shouldn't be giving citizenship to illegal immigrants. As mentioned before, I agree with Ted Cruz. Giving citizenship to illegal immigrants undermines the legal immigration process, and it's a slap in the face to those who have waited for years and paid thousands of dollars to become citizens the legal way. Well, the left is going absolutely nuts as well. Chuck Schumer tweeted earlier, "This plan flies in the face of what most Americans believe." While Trump finally acknowledged that the Dreamers should be allowed to stay here and become citizens, he uses them as a tool to tear apart our legal immigration system and adopt the wish list that anti-immigration hardliners have advocated for years. Immigration hardliners. I guess you're an immigration hardliner if you want border security, if you want people to immigrate to this country because they have something to add to this country, which is the whole point of immigration. We don't take in immigrants simply so they can leave poverty-stricken and war-torn countries that they came from. We need to have a merit-based system, not a system where somebody comes into America and brings all of their relatives with them, regardless of who has skills and who doesn't. And if you don't have skills, if you don't speak English, if you don't have the skills necessary to support yourself, then you become a burden on society, a burden on the government, and a burden on the taxpayers. Dianne Feinstein came out and said President Trump and Republicans cannot be allowed to use Dreamers as a bargaining chip for their wish list of anti-immigrant policies. Now I ask you all this. We're allowing more people to come into this country than ever before. We allow people to come into this country with tech skills, medical skills, and so on, skills for high-paying jobs that Americans are competing for. Why not limit the overall number of visas that we give out so that Americans are given more of an advantage in the marketplace? That would go along with Trump's America First policy. All of these immigrants are swelling the labor market, driving down wages. Now, here's what the Democrats want. They want unfettered immigration. They want more and more immigrants, whether legal or illegal, because they don't want a border wall or extra border security, because they know that these people will vote for Democrats. They wouldn't want this if they knew that these immigrants would vote in large part for Republicans. The Democrats also believe that when it comes to illegal immigration, why not just continue it? I mean, after all, we granted amnesty in 1986 in exchange for border security, and that never happened. Now we have millions of illegals in this country, and we're debating whether to grant amnesty to them. The bottom line is, folks, with no border security, we're going to find ourselves in the same place where we are today. All of this undermines the point of having a legal immigration system, which also needs to be fixed, as I've mentioned before. Now, just to wrap things up today, the Dow closed today up almost 224 points to close the week at over 26,600 points, a new record high. The fourth quarter GDP was released today. It was lower than expected at 2.6%. However, consumer spending, which accounts for more than two-thirds of U.S. economic activity, increased 3.8% in the fourth quarter, the quickest pace since the fourth quarter of 2014. So more good economic news for Donald Trump. And when it comes to the GDP, folks, this thing will be revised probably a couple of more times. So hopefully it will be revised upward, and maybe we'll actually get to 3% economic growth for the fourth quarter. But at any rate, folks, that's all I have today. Have a great weekend, and I hope you'll join me on Monday.